The Galactic Council chamber had not known silence in 300 years. Ambassador Velthari of the Sindari Collective remembered the exact moment it began, when the first Keithrani warship crossed into sovereign Sindari space and reduced the colony world of Praxis 7 to molten glass. That was 3 centuries ago. Since then, the war between the Sindari Collective and the Keithrani Dominion had consumed 17 star systems, 400 billion lives, and the collective hopes of a dozen allied species. Today, the silence was different. Today, it was the silence of shock. Velthari's crystalline eyes swept across the assembled delegates. The Keithrani ambassador, a massive reptilian creature named Vorkith, sat frozen at his delegation's platform, his scales shifting through colors that indicated profound disbelief. Beside him, the neutral observers from the Methani Trade Federation clutched their translation devices with trembling appendages. Even High Arbiter Thesson, who had presided over this council for 200 years and witnessed countless horrors, seemed unable to process what had just occurred. At the center of the chamber, projected in holographic clarity, hung the tactical display of the Velkhari system, the site of what was supposed to be the largest naval engagement in galactic history. Both sides had committed everything. The Sindari had deployed their entire grand fleet, 47,000 warships, 3 million fighters, and the legendary dreadnought Eternal Vigilance. The Keithrani had answered with their Dominion Armada, 52,000 vessels of war, including their feared planet killers. Neither fleet existed anymore. The holographic display showed nothing but debris fields stretching across millions of kilometers. Where 2 of the most powerful armadas in galactic history had prepared for their final confrontation, there was now only silence and scattered atoms, and in the center of that debris field sat a single ship, small by galactic standards, barely 2 kilometers in length. Its hull was an ugly gray color, covered in what appeared to be primitive armor plating. Its design was inelegant, almost brutal in its simplicity. No flowing curves, no artistic sensibilities, no adherence to any established school of naval architecture. Just angles, weapons, and engines. The ship bore markings that none of them had ever seen before. A simple designation painted on its hull in an unfamiliar script, USS Perseverance. High Arbiter Thesson finally found her voice. The ancient being's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she leaned forward in her elevated chair. Communications officer. Replay the transmission. I need to hear it again. The young Methani at the communications console hesitated, then complied. The chamber's speakers crackled to life, and a voice filled the space, a voice speaking in perfect, unaccented galactic common, yet somehow carrying an undertone that made every being in the room instinctively tense. Attention all vessels in the Velkhari system. This is Captain Daniel Shaw of the USS Perseverance, representing the United Earth Coalition. We have monitored your conflict for the past 3 standard years. We have attempted diplomatic contact through 7 separate channels. We have sent humanitarian aid to refugee populations on both sides of this conflict. All of these efforts have been ignored or actively rejected. The voice paused. In the council chamber, no one breathed. Yesterday, a refugee convoy carrying 37,000 civilians, mostly children, was destroyed in crossfire between your fleets. Those refugees were under our protection. They had been granted asylum on New Eden, a human colony world. They died because your war has no boundaries, no rules, and no regard for innocent life. We have tolerated this conflict because we believed it was not our place to interfere. We were wrong. Another pause. When the voice returned, it was somehow colder. You have exactly 1 standard hour to power down weapons and prepare for immediate ceasefire negotiations. Failure to comply will result in the immediate and total destruction of both fleets. This is not a threat. This is not a warning. This is a statement of fact. You have 1 hour. The recording ended. High Arbiter Thesson sat back in her chair, her ancient face unreadable. And they did not comply, she said. It was not a question. No, High Arbiter. The communications officer's voice trembled. Both fleets ignored the transmission. Admiral Velson of the Sindari commanded the human vessel to withdraw or be destroyed. Fleet Master Kethril of the Dominion said something similar, though more colorfully. Both fleets then turned their weapons on the human ship. And then, the officer swallowed visibly. Then the human ship opened fire, High Arbiter. The battle lasted 4 hours and 37 minutes. By the end, both fleets had been completely destroyed. The human ship sustained no visible damage. The silence that followed was absolute. Velthari found herself gripping the edges of her platform so hard that her crystalline fingers began to crack. One ship, a single vessel barely large enough to classify as a light cruiser by galactic standards, had destroyed nearly 100,000 warships. It had done so in less than 5 hours, and according to sensor data, it had done so without taking a single hit. Impossible, Vorkith finally growled, his massive form rising from his seat. This is some kind of trick, some weapon of mass destruction perhaps, a hidden fleet, something. One ship cannot do what you are suggesting. Ambassador Vorkith. The voice came from the chamber's main entrance and every head turned toward it. The human who stood there was not what Velthari had expected. He was average height for his species, perhaps 1.8 meters tall. His hair was gray, cut short. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, the color of storm clouds. He wore a uniform of dark blue with gold trim, and on his chest hung several small metallic decorations that Velthari assumed were military honors. Behind him stood 2 others. A woman with dark skin and close-cropped hair, her posture rigid and professional, and a younger man with pale skin and red hair who carried a data tablet and seemed to be cataloging everything he saw with unconcealed curiosity. "I am Captain Daniel Shaw," the gray-haired human said. His voice was calm, measured. "And I can assure you, Ambassador, there was no trick, no hidden fleet, no superweapon, just my ship and my crew." He walked forward, and Velthari noticed that he moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades in artificial gravity. The 2 humans behind him followed at a respectful distance. "High Arbiter Thesson," Shaw continued, stopping at the center of the chamber and inclining his head in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. But given the circumstances, I felt a personal appearance was warranted." Thesson studied him for a long moment. "Captain Shaw, your species is unknown to this council. Your world is not registered in our databases, and yet you come here having just destroyed 2 of the largest military forces in the galaxy, and you speak of apologies. I understand your confusion, High Arbiter, and I will explain everything. But first, I want to make something absolutely clear." Shaw's eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of every ambassador in turn. "Humanity did not want this. We have watched your war for years, hoping it would resolve itself. We are not conquerors. We are not here to rule. We are here because 37,000 people died under our protection, and we will not let that stand. And so you responded by killing millions more." Vorkith's voice was a thunderous rumble. "How many of my people died on those ships, human? How many Kethrani warriors did you murder?" Shaw turned to face him. "Approximately 4.7 million Kethrani personnel, and approximately 4.2 million Sindari. I know exactly how many died, Ambassador. I know every ship that was destroyed, the names of every commanding officer, and the final transmissions of every vessel as it broke apart. My tactical officer has compiled a complete record." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or exhaustion. "I gave them a chance," Shaw said quietly. "I gave them an hour to stand down. They chose to fire on my ship instead. They chose to continue a war that has killed 400 billion sentient beings over 3 centuries. They made that choice, Ambassador, not me." Velthari finally found her voice. "Captain Shaw, I am Ambassador Velthari of the Sindari Collective. You speak as if you had the power to stop this war at any time. As if you have been watching us struggle and die for centuries while you sat in comfort. Is this true?" Shaw turned to her, and his expression softened slightly. "Not centuries, Ambassador. Humanity only achieved faster than light travel 83 years ago. We discovered the broader galactic community about 60 years ago. For the past 3 years, we have been monitoring your conflict and attempting to establish diplomatic relations." "We received no diplomatic communications from your people," Velthari said. "No, you didn't," Shaw's jaw tightened, Because your military command classified our transmissions as enemy propaganda and deleted them. The Keithrani did the same. Both sides assumed we were working for the other. Both sides refused to even acknowledge our existence. You cannot expect us to believe, Vorkith began. Commander Lisa Grant, Shaw interrupted, gesturing to the woman behind him. Show them. The dark-skinned woman stepped forward and produced a small device. A moment later, the holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered and changed. It now showed a cascade of data, transmission logs, diplomatic communications, distress calls, and responses. Over the past 3 years, Commander Grant said, her voice crisp and professional, the United Earth Coalition has sent over 4,000 diplomatic communications to both the Sindari Collective and the Keithrani Dominion. We have offered humanitarian aid, medical supplies, refugee assistance, and mediation services. We have received exactly 0 official responses. However, our intelligence division has intercepted internal communications from both governments acknowledging receipt of our messages and ordering their immediate deletion. She highlighted a specific transmission. This is from Sindari Military Command, dated 14 months ago. It reads, another transmission from the unknown species calling themselves humans. Intelligence analysis suggests possible Keithrani deception operation. Delete and ignore. No response authorized. Another highlight. And this is from the Keithrani High Command dated 12 months ago. Human transmission intercepted. Probable Sindari psychological warfare. Destroy all records. Any officer who responds will be executed for treason. Velthari felt sick. She recognized the authorization codes on the Sindari transmission. They were genuine. Her own government had been receiving human communications for years and had actively suppressed them. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would they do this? Because acknowledging us would have complicated things, Shaw said. Your war has become self-sustaining, Ambassador. Both sides have built their entire civilizations around it. Your economies, your governments, your cultures, everything is oriented toward the conflict. Peace would be devastating. Industries would collapse. Governments would fall. An entire generation that knows nothing but war would have to find new purpose. He shook his head slowly. We've seen this before, on our own world. Humans have a long and terrible history of war, Ambassador. We understand the psychology of it better than we'd like, and we recognize the signs in your conflict. This war stopped being about territory or revenge or ideology a long time ago. It continues because too many powerful people profit from it continuing. And so you decided to end it by force, High Arbiter Thesson said. You decided that your judgment was superior to that of the species involved. No, High Arbiter. We decided that 37,000 dead civilians was the limit of what we could tolerate. Shaw's voice hardened. Convoy that was destroyed was carrying refugees from both sides. Sindari and Keithrani living together in peace, trying to escape the war. They had children with them, families, people who wanted nothing more than to build new lives away from the fighting. He reached into his uniform and produced a small holographic projector. When he activated it, the image of a child appeared, a young Sindari girl with crystalline features and wide, innocent eyes. Her name was Crystalline. She was 7 years old. Her family applied for asylum on New Eden because her parents, a Sindari mother and a Keithrani father, were marked for execution by both governments. She loved to draw. She wanted to be an artist when she grew up. She died when a Keithrani torpedo struck the refugee ship she was traveling on. Shaw's voice cracked slightly, but he continued. The torpedo was aimed at a Sindari military vessel. The refugee ship was simply in the way. Collateral damage. Acceptable losses. He looked at Vorkith. That is what your war has become, Ambassador. Children are acceptable losses. Vorkith said nothing. His scales had shifted to a pale gray color that Velthari had never seen before. Captain Shaw, Thesson said after a long moment. You have explained why you acted. You have not explained how. One ship, even a technologically advanced one, should not be capable of what you describe. The combined firepower of those two fleets could crack a planet. How did you survive, let alone win? Shaw glanced at the red-haired man behind him. Lieutenant Kevin Price, you're the science officer, you explain it. The young man stepped forward, his earlier curiosity now replaced by a serious expression. High Arbiter, distinguished ambassadors. The answer is actually quite simple, though I suspect you won't like it. He gestured, and the holographic display changed again, showing a complex diagram of the USS Perseverance. The Perseverance is not our most advanced warship, Price said. It's actually a relatively standard patrol cruiser about 40 years old by human standards. It was chosen for this mission specifically because it represents our baseline military capabilities, not our peak. He let that sink in for a moment, watching the reactions around the chamber. When we first made contact with galactic civilization, we were concerned by what we found. Multiple species had achieved faster than light travel thousands of years before us. They had built vast interstellar empires, and yet their technology appeared to have stagnated. Stagnated, Velthari couldn't help but interrupt. The Sindari Collective has made tremendous advances in the past century alone. With respect, Ambassador, no, you haven't. Price pulled up another display. We've analyzed the technological development of every major galactic power over the past 3,000 years. The rate of innovation is remarkably consistent and remarkably slow. New technologies are developed at a rate of approximately one major breakthrough per century, and those breakthroughs are almost always incremental improvements on existing systems. He paused, seemingly choosing his next words carefully. Humans, by contrast, went from horse-drawn carriages to nuclear weapons in less than 200 years. We went from our first powered flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. We developed faster-than-light travel within 30 years of first theorizing it was possible. Your species is inherently more intelligent, Thesson asked, her tone skeptical. No, High Arbiter, we're not smarter, we're hungrier. Price smiled slightly. Human history is a story of constant conflict, constant competition, constant striving for advantage. Every time one group developed a new technology, their rivals immediately began working to counter it or surpass it. War, as terrible as it is, drove our innovation at a pace that peaceful societies cannot match. The galactic community, he continued, achieved faster than light travel and then stopped. Oh, there were improvements, refinements. But the fundamental principles remained unchanged for millennia. Why? Because there was no existential pressure. Space was vast enough that conflicts could be avoided. Resources were abundant enough that competition was limited. There was no need to innovate at a desperate pace. And humans, Velthari asked. Humans spent our entire history on a single planet fighting over limited resources. We never had the luxury of avoiding conflict. We had to innovate or die. And when we finally reached the stars, we brought that mindset with us. Price's expression grew more serious. In the 83 years since we developed FTL travel, we've made more technological advances than the rest of the galaxy combined has made in the past 3,000. He gestured at the diagram of the Perseverance. This ship has defensive shields that your weapons cannot penetrate, not because we discovered some exotic particle or mystical energy source, but because we refined shield technology through 17,000 separate engineering iterations. Our weapon systems are similarly advanced, not through any single breakthrough, but through relentless, obsessive improvement. You are saying, Vorkith growled, that you are simply better than us. No, Ambassador, I'm saying we're different than you. You've had thousands of years of relative peace. You've built beautiful civilizations, incredible art, complex social systems. We've spent our entire existence preparing for war. Price's voice was quiet. It's not a point of pride, it's a tragedy. We've become very, very good at killing things because that's what our history demanded of us. Shaw stepped forward again. The point Lieutenant Price is making, somewhat diplomatically, is this. The United Earth Coalition does not want war with anyone. We came out here hoping to find friends, allies, maybe even mentors. Instead, we found a galaxy that has been at peace for so long it's forgotten how to fight, and two species that have been at war for so long they've forgotten how to stop. He looked around the chamber. We can destroy every fleet you send against us. We can reduce your homeworlds to ashes. We have the technology and the capability, but we don't want to, we want to help. Help, Thesson's voice was sharp. You've just destroyed nearly 10 million soldiers from both sides. You call that help? I call it surgery, Shaw replied. Sometimes you have to cut out the diseased tissue to save the patient. Those fleets were the instruments of a war that has killed 400 billion people. Their destruction ends that war today forever, because neither side has anything left to fight with. He took a deep breath. The United Earth Coalition is prepared to offer humanitarian assistance to both the Sindari Collective and the Keithrani Dominion. Food, medicine, reconstruction materials. We have colony worlds that can accept refugees from both sides. We have diplomatic teams ready to help negotiate a permanent peace settlement. And if we refuse, Vorkith asked, if we rebuild our fleets and resume the war, Shaw met his gaze steadily, then we'll destroy those fleets too. And the ones after that, and the ones after that. We will keep destroying your instruments of war until you no longer have the ability or the will to build more. The war ends today, Ambassador. The only question is how much more suffering you want to endure before you accept that fact. The chamber fell silent again. Velthari found herself doing something she had never done before in 3 decades of diplomatic service. Hoping. Maybe, she thought, this was the moment everything changed. High Arbiter Thesson rose from her chair, her ancient form somehow seeming less burdened than it had moments before. Captain Shaw, the Galactic Council will need time to deliberate on your offer. However, I believe I can speak for the neutral parties when I say that we would welcome humanity's involvement in peace negotiations. This war has gone on long enough. She turned to the Sindari and Keithrani delegations. Ambassadors. Your governments no longer have the military strength to continue this conflict. You can reject human assistance and watch your civilizations crumble, or you can accept it and perhaps build something better from the ruins. The choice is yours. Vorkith was the first to respond. The massive Keithrani ambassador slowly descended from his platform and approached Captain Shaw. For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other, the ancient warrior and the human who had just destroyed everything he'd spent his life building. My son was on one of those ships, Vorkith said quietly. He was a good officer. He believed in the cause. Shaw nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss, Ambassador, truly. Do not be sorry. Vorkith's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a pale blue. My son died believing he was fighting for something worth dying for. Perhaps now, because of what you have done, his children will not have to. He extended one massive clawed hand. The Keithrani Dominion will negotiate. Shaw took the hand without hesitation. Thank you, Ambassador. Velthari descended from her own platform, her crystalline legs carrying her forward on automatic pilot while her mind raced through the implications of everything that had happened. She stopped beside Vorkith, looking up at the human captain. The Sindari Collective will also negotiate, she said, but I have a question first. Ask. Why, truly why? You could have conquered us, you could have taken everything, why offer help instead? Shaw was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Because we've been where you are, Ambassador. Humanity has fought wars that lasted generations. We've seen empires rise and fall. We've committed atrocities that still haunt us centuries later. He shook his head slowly. We know what it's like to be trapped in a cycle of violence that seems impossible to break. And we know that the only way out is for someone to be strong enough to say, enough. He gestured at the holographic display, still showing the debris field that had once been 2 mighty armadas. This isn't how we wanted to make first contact, but maybe it's how we needed to. Sometimes peace can only come at the end of a very big gun. Commander Grant stepped forward. Captain. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. The Coalition Council wants a status report. Shaw nodded. Tell them the hard part is over. Now comes the real work. He turned back to the assembled diplomats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss. I suggest we get started. The next several hours passed in a blur of negotiations, proposals, and heated debates. Shaw proved to be a surprisingly skilled diplomat, knowing when to push and when to yield, when to threaten, and when to offer compromise. Commander Grant provided detailed data on human capabilities and resources, carefully calibrated to be impressive without being provocative. Lieutenant Price fielded technical questions with patience and clarity. By the time the council recessed for the evening, The basic framework of a peace agreement had been established. Both the Sindari and the Keithrani would agree to an immediate ceasefire. Human observers would be stationed on both sides to ensure compliance. Prisoner exchanges would begin within the week. Territorial disputes would be resolved through arbitration rather than combat. Velthari found herself walking beside Captain Shaw as they left the council chamber. The human seemed tired, his earlier energy replaced by a bone-deep weariness that she recognized from her own reflection. "Captain," she said, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Ambassador." "The little girl, Crystalline, how did you know about her?" Shaw stopped walking. For a moment his carefully maintained composure cracked, and Velthari saw the man behind the uniform, someone who carried far more weight than his rank required. "Her family applied for asylum through my office," he said quietly. "I reviewed their case personally. I met Crystalline when they first arrived at the processing center. She showed me her drawings. She was remarkable." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It was a child's drawing showing a ship against a field of stars. The ship was surrounded by smaller figures, people of different species, all holding hands. "She gave me this," Shaw said. "She said it was what she wanted the future to look like. Everyone together, no more fighting." Velthari felt her crystalline eyes grow warm with moisture she didn't know she could produce. "And you kept it?" "I keep it to remind me what we're fighting for." Shaw carefully folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. "Crystalline died because two civilizations couldn't figure out how to stop killing each other. I made sure that wouldn't happen anymore. Not because I wanted to, because I had to." "You carry guilt for what you did today," Velthari said. "It wasn't a question." "I carry guilt for all of it, Ambassador. The people I killed today, the people I couldn't save yesterday, the people who will die tomorrow because I couldn't act sooner." Shaw's voice was steady, but there was something broken beneath the surface. "Humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I did something. It was terrible, but it was necessary." They walked in silence for a while longer, passing through the grand corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters. Outside the windows, the lights of 1,000 ships flickered against the darkness of space. Merchant vessels, diplomatic craft, and the distant patrol ships of a dozen species, all going about their business as if the universe hadn't just fundamentally changed. "What happens now?" Velthari finally asked. Shaw looked out at the stars. "Now we build something better, your people and mine, the Keithrani too if they're willing. We take all that energy that was going into war and redirect it into something constructive. Medicine, art, exploration, whatever you want. The galaxy is vast, Ambassador, there's room for everyone. And if someone starts another war," Shaw's expression hardened slightly, "then we'll end that one too. Humanity didn't come out here to conquer or to rule. But we will not stand by and watch innocent people die while governments play politics. Not anymore. Never again." Velthari considered this for a moment. "Some would call that arrogance, assuming you have the right to impose peace on others." "Some would," Shaw agreed, "and maybe they're right. Maybe we have no right to interfere in the affairs of others, but I keep thinking about Crystalline, about the 37,000 people on that convoy, about the 400 billion who died in a war that everyone knew was pointless but no one could stop." He shook his head. "Someone had to do something. We were the only ones who could." They reached a junction in the corridor. Shaw would turn left toward the docking bays where his ship waited. Velthari would turn right, toward the diplomatic quarters where her staff was undoubtedly panicking over the day's events. "Captain Shaw," Velthari said, extending her crystalline hand in the gesture she'd seen Vorkith use. "Thank you, not for ending our war. I'm not sure I have the right to thank you for that. But thank you for caring enough to try, for caring about a little girl you barely knew." Shaw took her hand gently, careful not to put pressure on her delicate crystalline structure. "Ambassador, I hope we meet again under better circumstances." "I hope so too." They parted ways. Velthari watched the human walk away, his two officers falling into step beside him. Even from behind, she could see the weight he carried, the burden of having ended a war and begun a new era in galactic history. She turned and walked toward her quarters, her mind already racing through the reports she would need to file, the conversations she would need to have, the future she would need to help build. 300 years of war, ended in 5 hours. Not by diplomacy, not by exhaustion, not by the slow grinding down of both sides until neither could continue. Ended by force of arms, by a species that had the power to destroy everyone and chose to save them instead. It was not how anyone had expected the war to end. But perhaps that was the point. Velthari thought about Crystalline's drawing all those different species holding hands among the stars. It had seemed like a child's fantasy. Now, for the first time in 3 centuries, it seemed like something that might actually be possible. She entered her quarters and began composing her report to the Sindari Council. There would be resistance, she knew. Old hatreds didn't die easily, but she would fight for this. She would fight for a future where no more children had to die in crossfire between fleets that had forgotten what they were fighting for. Behind her, through the window, the stars continued their eternal dance. And somewhere among them, a single gray ship turned toward home, carrying the hopes of a galaxy that had just learned a very important lesson. Humanity had entered the war, and now the real work could begin. 12 standard years had passed since the Battle of Velkhari, as historians from 3 species had come to call it. In that time, the galaxy had changed more than it had in the previous 3 millennia. Velthari stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive orbital platform that had become the symbol of the new galactic order. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships of every design imaginable passing by. Sindari crystal vessels, Keithrani war barges converted for cargo transport, sleek human frigates, and dozens of other craft from species that had emerged from isolation to join the growing community. The station itself was a monument to cooperation. Designed by human engineers, built by Keithrani labor, and decorated with Sindari art, it served as the headquarters for the Galactic Peace Council, a new organization dedicated to preventing future conflicts through diplomacy, trade, and mutual development. "You look thoughtful, Ambassador." Velthari turned to find Daniel Shaw approaching. He had aged in the years since their first meeting, more gray in his hair, more lines on his face, but his eyes remained the same, sharp, observant, carrying the weight of decisions that still haunted him. "Admiral Shaw," she said, noting his new rank insignia, "I was just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The day we met, the council chamber, the silence." She gestured at the bustling activity visible through the windows. "Look at what we've built since then." Shaw joined her at the window, his reflection ghosting across the transparency beside her crystalline form. "Sometimes I still can't believe it worked. Every morning I wake up expecting to hear that the war has resumed, that everything we've done was for nothing." "There have been incidents," Velthari acknowledged. "Border skirmishes, terrorist attacks by extremists on both sides, but nothing like before. Because everyone knows what happens if it escalates." Shaw's voice was flat. "They know we're watching. They know we'll intervene." "Does that bother you, being the, what do your people call it, the boogeyman?" Shaw laughed softly. "We have a lot of words for it: peacekeepers, world police, big stick diplomacy. None of them are particularly flattering." He shook his head. "But if being feared means no more dead children, I can live with it." Velthari nodded slowly. In the years since the Battle of Velkhari, she had come to understand humans better than most of her species. They were not the simple warriors that first impressions suggested. They were complex, contradictory, capable of both incredible violence and profound compassion. "The memorial is almost complete," she said, changing the subject. "The architects wanted to know if you would attend the dedication ceremony." Shaw was quiet for a moment. The memorial she spoke of was being built on the site of the destroyed refugee convoy, a massive structure in space that would hold the names of every person who died that day, including the little Sindari girl who had inspired a human captain to end a galactic war. "Yes," he said finally, "I'll be there. There is something else." Velthari hesitated, then reached into her diplomatic satchel and withdrew a small package. "The memorial committee found something among the debris. They asked me to give it to you." Shaw took the package with trembling hands. When he opened it, his face went pale. Inside was another drawing, different from the one he carried, but clearly by the same hand. This one showed a human ship surrounded by stars with a small figure standing on its hull, a Sindari child with crystalline features waving at the viewer. It was in a sealed container, Velthari explained softly. The rescue teams found it floating among the wreckage. The container was addressed to you. Shaw couldn't speak. He stared at the drawing, tears rolling down his weathered face as Velthari pretended not to notice. She believed in you, Velthari said. Even at the end, she believed you would come. She believed humans would save them. I was too late. For her, yes, but not for everyone else. Not for the billions who would have died if the war continued. Not for the children who are growing up now in a galaxy that is, for the first time in centuries, truly at peace. Velthari placed a gentle hand on his arm. She would have been happy, I think, to know that her faith was justified. Shaw carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his pocket next to the other one. Sometimes I wonder what she would have become if she had lived. An artist, you said. She wanted to be an artist. Yes, Shaw looked out at the stars again. Ambassador, do you know what humans believe about death? I know you have many beliefs. Your species is remarkably diverse in that regard. We are, but there's one belief that crosses most of our cultures in one form or another. The idea that the dead live on in the memories of those who knew them, that as long as someone remembers, they're never truly gone. He turned to face her. I will never forget Crystalline. I will carry her with me until the day I die. And I will make sure that everyone knows why we do what we do. Not for glory, not for power, for her, for all of them. Velthari felt something shift inside her. Some last remaining doubt about humans, about their intentions, about whether they truly were different from the conquerors and tyrants that had plagued galactic history. In that moment, looking at the tears on a warrior's face as he mourned a child he had barely known, she understood. The Sindari have a similar belief, she said. We call it the crystal memory. When one of us dies, their family takes a small piece of their crystalline structure and places it in a communal monument. The light that passes through creates patterns, shadows, and refractions that tell the story of who they were. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Crystalline's family was on the convoy with her. They all died together. There was no one left to add her to the memory. Velthari met Shaw's eyes. Until now. The Memorial Committee has agreed to incorporate Sindari crystal memory architecture into the design. Crystalline will be the first to be honored there. Shaw nodded slowly. Thank you, Ambassador. That means more than I can say. They stood together in silence, watching the ships pass by, vessels from a dozen species, going about the business of building a better future. Behind them, the station hummed with the activity of diplomats and engineers and artists and scientists, all working together in ways that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Admiral, a young human officer called from the doorway. The Keithrani delegation has arrived. They're asking for you. Shaw straightened, his public mask sliding back into place. Tell them I'll be right there. He turned to Velthari. Ambassador, will you join us? Of course. What are we discussing today? A joint exploration mission. The Keithrani have detected something interesting in the galactic core, energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. They've proposed a combined fleet. Human, Sindari, and Keithrani ships working together to investigate. Velthari's crystalline eyes widened. 3 species that were at war 12 years ago exploring the unknown together. The Council will approve, I think. That's the hope, Shaw smiled slightly. Come on, Ambassador, let's go make history. They walked together toward the conference room, their footsteps echoing through the corridors of Unity Station. Behind them, through the observation deck windows, a human ship passed by, small, gray, unremarkable. Its designation was barely visible against the glare of distant stars, USS Perseverance. Somewhere in the void beyond, the memorial was taking shape. A monument to those who had died, a warning to those who might forget, and a promise to those who would come after. Humanity had entered the war. And they had ended it not with conquest but with a choice. The choice to say, enough. The choice to demand better. The choice to build a future worthy of a little girl who had dreamed of stars. And now, together, they would see what that future held. The end.